Welcome back everyone to Psych Crunch. If you're new here, I'm Lara.
And I'm Tulika.
We are both IB psychology students who are here to teach you about psychological phenomena which affect us in day-to-day life.
Now, today we're going to be focusing on a very controversial topic in almost every community. Dun dun dun! Technology.
Now, we are avid users of technology. We probably stare at a screen for about 6 hours a day. And honestly, I don't know if I can live without it.
I think so too. I can't remember a time where schoolwork was done on pen and paper. Like, so archaic.
Now today, we will be focusing on two discussions. The first one is, to what extent does the use of technology affect cognitive processes?
Ooh, interesting.
And we will also be discussing the positive and negative effects of modern technology on cognitive processes, which is one of my favorite topics, FYI.
But before we start, let me just talk to you a bit about what the Google effect is. Now, a Google effect is a belief that people are using internet as a personal memory bank, and it is sometimes referred to as digital amnesia, or the tendency to forget information that can be found readily online by using search engines. The frequent usage of internet to obtain information may represent a modern and a new type of transactive memory system that reduces the reliance on our own individual memory stores. Individuals, as a result, would no longer need to remember information but can simply search it up. And all they would need to remember is how to search for the information effectively and using a search engine such as Google and where it can be found.
Now, you mentioned the transactive memory system. What exactly is it?
Well, you see, the transactive memory system is something that has been there for a long time. It is a type of memory that exists within groups of closely linked individuals. And between groups, a transactive memory system is developed where each individual needs to remember and store only the information that they're responsible for, lowering the load of each member. And it also includes knowledge of where the information can be found and how to access it. And because the group allows access to that information whenever it is needed, there's no need to commit that information to long-term memory.
All right, now we can get into it. Let's start looking into the studies which are relevant to the topic of technology's effect on cognitive processes. I believe the first one is Sparrow and al. 2011?
Yep, that is correct.
Now, dear listeners, pay attention to this study because we will be coming back to it for our next topic of discussion as well. But let's begin.
This is a very interesting study, actually, and it was conducted to investigate the relationship between memory and technology and ease of access of information. They were examining whether search engines have allowed people to offload memory processing and so that they invest less effort in committing information to memory, and if the internet is the new form of transactive memory. The procedure consisted of 46 undergraduate students, 28 female and 18 male at Harvard University. This experiment used 2x2 independent samples design, meaning that there were two independent variables that were being manipulated at two different levels. And then participants were asked to type up 40 trivia facts into a computer. And the participants were told that the computer would store everything they typed for later reference, whilst the other half were told that the information would be erased. And within each of these groups, half of the participants were explicitly asked to try remember the information, while the other half weren't. So essentially, there were 4 different conditions. One condition told to save and remember, second one save, not asked to remember, third one erase and remember, and the fourth one erase and not asked to remember.
And what did they find?
So the results show that being asked to remember the information actually made no difference, but it did matter if participants believed that the information would be stored in a computer. Those who thought it would be stored made a far less effort to commit it to memory.
No way. I did not expect that. So what did the researchers conclude basically from this whole experiment?
So they concluded that humans may be offloading their memory responsibility to the collective memory of internet and search engines that can access it. So the researchers interpreted these findings as indicating that the human memory processes are adapting and changing in the digital age, and that the internet may be part of a new and global transactive memory.
That's insane. But now that I think about it, I do rely a lot on technology to somewhat store my memory. Does that make sense? Like shopping lists and all my notes.
Yep, totally. Especially with school now that I think about it.
Okay, so now we're going to be looking more into this study in a second, but there's also another study relevant to the topic of the whole technology's effect on cognitive processes, and this is Rosen and al. Or others, 2011. Now, the aim of this study was to investigate the direct impact of text messages, interruptions on memory recall in a classroom environment.
Now, I believe when I say this is pretty relevant to us, especially since we get to use our phones in the classroom and in school on a daily basis. So let's explore the study a bit more. So the procedure consisted of 185 college students, of which 80% were female, and the mean was 25 years, and 83% were part of this generation called Net Generation, which is born between 1980 and 1989. And they were told that they would watch a 30-minute video lecture and post-test of material relevant to their course. And some would receive text from researchers, which they had to respond to promptly. There were three conditions. So no text sent, 4 text sent, and 8 text sent. And after the lecture, they answered the question about the text, such as, about the nature of their text and how many words were in the text, whether personal texts were received and whether they answered them, and typical texting behaviors. The results show that the participants' results were split into 3 groups of texts received and sent. So the 3 groups were no, in which only 0 to 7 texts were received and sent, moderate 8 to 15, and high, which consisted of 16 or more. 75% of the participants agreed that receiving and sending text severely impairs learning, which when carried out during a lecture. But 40% agreed that it was acceptable to text during a lecture, and 18% said that they never responded to text in class, and 67% stated that they would respond to a text, and 75% when it was to a family member. And the low texting group performed 10.6% better than high in their memory scores. And then there was a negative correlation between total number of words in text and scores. And those who chose to wait to respond around 45 minutes did substantially better.
Wow. And what did the researchers conclude from this amazing experiment?
So the findings were that they concluded that memory is affected by texting, but not massively. Participants who were in the high texting category did only, slightly worse than the rest on the test. And waiting to respond and open the text did produce better performance in the students.
Look, Tulika, I couldn't help wondering, but what was the methodology of Rose? Was the methodology of Rosen like an advantage or was it a disadvantage?
Good question. Firstly, the experiment was a well-designed field experiment that included attributes to texting, and the researchers ensured that the relevant texts were received at crucial points in the videotape, so that researchers ensured that the relevant texts were received at crucial points. And as a result, they were easy to measure. Also, this was a field experiment. And because it was a field experiment, there was a degree of ecological validity to this study, as the participants were in a familiar situation carrying out behavior that they were well used to performing. And the researchers did not control the number of texts being sent by other people, which could have been a disadvantage because it could confound the results as it introduces an extra variable that could have interfered, with the independent variable.
Yeah, you make some really good points, but let's conclude that whole part of this research, and let's move on to the second topic of discussions right now, since we're running a little bit out of time, and that is the positive and negative effects of modern technology on cognitive processes.
We have heard this argument countless of times in our lives, especially from our parents, family, claiming that the internet is horrible for us and turning us into this depressed and lonely zombies we call teenagers.
Yeah.
But how is this, does this have some grain of truth to it?
Mm-hmm. So the argument tends to gear towards the negative side of technology. However, it can't be denied that technology has its benefits, It has helped in countless fields such as medicine, obviously communication, business, etc. But how has modern technology affected our psychology?
To evaluate this question, we need to first develop some context. As Baumeister explains, the term self-concept refers to our view of who we are. This can include what we like, what we are good at, and etc. Yet there is no judgment in self-concept. The element of judgment could possibly come in with self-esteem. This refers to our emotional response to our self-concept, which could be satisfaction or some form of dissatisfaction. To begin the discussion, first we must look at the infamous negative effects of modern technology on our cognitive processes.
So first, as mentioned before, the first study relevant to this question is our beloved Sparrow and others, like the 2011 study, which we mentioned right before. And in order to save time, we won't restate this study, but you could rewind to refresh your memory if required, whatever you prefer.
Now that we have covered that, let's actually begin with the studies. We will be looking at Chow and Edge 2014, whose aim was to test the influence of availability heuristic on how Facebook users evaluate themselves in comparison to other people. Just to clarify, the availability heuristic basically means that we are likely to base our self-esteem on those examples we can most easily remember, or something that is the most available, and that are likely to be the most different from our own experience. I'm sure some of you can already see how this heuristic has been working in your mind. Now let's continue with.
The procedure basically consisted of 425 undergraduate students who did a survey with a 10-point scale of agreement, all right? The statements included things such as, my friends have a better life than me, and my friends are happier than I am. And the questions included how much time they spent on their Facebook page and with their friends as well. The results show that with more time spent on Facebook than with friends, people believe that their friends are happier than them. Whilst more time spent with friends than on Facebook meant that their friends did not have better lives and were just not happier.
Oh, wow. So I'm assuming that what the researchers concluded was that more time spent with friends in real life means people are happier, as they're more likely to compare themselves to those online?
Exactly. I mean, they're less likely to compare themselves to those online. So doesn't that explain so much?
Yeah, actually a lot. It's honestly so weird to see my suspicions confirmed to the study. I can see how this relates to the social comparison theory, actually, by Festinger, It says that there is a drive within individuals to have accurate self-evaluations. We determine our own social and personal worth based on how we compare ourselves to others. Isn't that crazy? People compare their experience to that of those around them as a way to work out what kind of person they are and how they should judge themselves, which is self-esteem.
I know, right? But now let's get into analyzing these two studies, Sparrow and the one which we just covered. Because as we have realized as psychology students, not all studies are up to par and can sometimes be unreliable. So first, the methodology. What do you think, Tulika? I know that you have like a very analyzing mind, especially when it comes to methodology.
Yeah, for sure. So for Sparrow et al. Specifically, the researchers acknowledged that their third experiment may have been confounded by the amount of information in trivia fact versus the name of the folder. At the same time, the use of experimental methods is a key advantage of Sparrow et al. Research because most of the studies conducted on digital technology and cognition rely on a correlation method and self-report procedures, which neither of them actually establish a cause and effect relationship, which is quite necessary. For Cho and Edge, the 10-point scale of agreement creates a lot of room for participants to express their thoughts on each statement. However, the questionnaire does not give the full opinions and thoughts of the participants. And the artificial settings in which it is conducted in may lead to the participant acting in a natural way, meaning it could possibly mean it has low ecological validity, right?
I agree completely. And not all studies are made perfect, guys. We've seen this a lot. I also, do you think that there could be some alternative explanations to these studies, though? Because I doubt it's only because of this one variable which they're testing.
I mean, sure, yeah, maybe.
Like for Sparrow and all, an alternative explanation could be that the participants would not have remembered their input, regardless of the fact that it was on a computer. I mean, a further study was conducted to test this explanation, considering like there was no control in this experiment, to compare the results and everything. And as for True and Edge, I believe it's pronounced, an alternative explanation could be that some of the participants already compared themselves to their friends, regardless of internet usage. I mean, even before the internet, people would compare themselves to each other, especially when concerned with like social matters, So the case may be that these comparisons were only amplified as a result of the internet, but existed nonetheless. Does that make sense?
Yeah, in a way, yeah. Especially with the comparing oneself to other, regardless of the internet, for sure. Okay, but one aspect that both studies needed to consider more was gender. For Sparrow et al., the variable of gender was not really paid attention to. If the researchers were to look at the results based on gender as well in each different condition, then it is possible that they may see some variation results, correct?
I agree with that too.
It is possible that females or males may rely more or less on internet data, and this would also reveal more information about the variances in brain regarding gender. And as for Cho and Edge, gender considerations gender should have been provided. So much information could have been provided, which would provide insight for gender psychology. And it is common that females feel heavily compelled to follow their societal standards set for them compared to men, who may not care as much. And the results may have shown that the women may feel less content with their lives compared to men due to their comparison to other women who seem to be the ideal of society.
Yeah, when I first read True and Edge, I was surprised that the sample wasn't divided based on gender. I would have loved to see the results of, males compared to females. But as for ethical considerations, for Sparrow and all, it seems that all ethical standards were met. Like the only issue that I can really think of is competency. The study doesn't really state if any of the participants had any issues with memory prior to the experiment. So this could create unwanted stress or anxiety possibly for the participants who suffer from such a disorder. And I guess this could be seen as unethical by some, but it's
more or less ethical. Yeah,
exactly. So for True and Edge as well, I don't really see any major ethical issues, but the psychological effect of comparison, like that whole activity itself, could have upset.
For sure.
It can be assumed that during the questionnaire, participants may have become upset if it was brought, into their attention how, I don't want to say unsatisfying their lives are, but like it could have made them realize that. And it could be seen as unethical by some, but whatever needs to be done in the name of science,
For sure. That's definitely a possibility. I mean, I don't think I'd see those as being directly unethical per se, but you never really know.
Mhm.
Now moving on. For cultural considerations, Faradol could have provided different results, yeah?
I mean, I guess. How so?
For example, the educational system in the West is based more on processing and application process of learning, while the East, such as countries in Asia, tend to focus more on memorization and lack in real life application. And if the researchers were to consider this, the data would have been able to show if a factor such as this was affecting memory, or whether it was the internet or these cultural factors.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see. I guess you could say the same for shoe and edge. Different cultures view social comparison differently, I would assume. Some people may be brought up without comparison to others and may in turn be less likely to compare themselves in the future when they grow up. The consideration of culture in this experiment may have shown that social comparison may not be affected by the internet, but instead by an individual's culture. Like for me, I definitely noticed that one side of my family is more accustomed to comparison, while the other has never even compared me to like anyone or like someone I have no comparison to, basically.
Honestly, both my cultures are judgmental, both my side of
No.
family, so I can't say anything about that. But yeah, that explanation makes sense. Now, that was all for negative effects. I hope so. Should we move on to the positives?
Yes, finally. I'm so excited.
All right, the part everyone was waiting for. The positive effects of modern technology on cognitive processes such as memory. Many studies have been conducted to show how moderate video game can improve thinking and decision making.
Video gaming? No way. That's literally the most demonized aspect of technology. And you're telling me it's going to convince me that technology is good? Are you sure?
Yeah, I know. It might seem weird, but once you see the studies, you're going to understand. By the way, hold on tight. We have 3 studies for this side of argument.
Fine. I'm ready.
All right. So the first study is Glass, Meadow, and Love. Weird name, but all right. Who aim to
Yeah.
see whether playing a fast-paced video game can improve strategic thinking. Now, to do this, they used a sample of 72 female undergraduate volunteers. And in order to be in the sample, the participants had to regularly play video games for less than 2 hours a week on average. At the beginning of the study, the researchers measured the volunteers' cognitive flexibility, that is, their ability to switch between cognitive tasks and to think on their feet while solving problems. The participants were then asked to play a video game for 40 hours over an 8-week period, either a fast-paced game that requires strategic thinking, or such as StarCraft, if any of you gamers out there know this, or a simulation game. The Sims, obviously.
Oh, I love The Sims. I feel like I played 40 hours in a weekend before. I'm not even kidding. So addicting.
Bro, same. You're not the first person I heard say that. Maybe I should give it a go as well. Anyways, the
Yeah,
results.
probably.
Yeah, I know, right? Anyways, the result showed that at the end of the 8 weeks, the results showed that those who played StarCraft had shown a greater improvement in cognitive flexibility.
No, my beloved Sims has no use for me. I should have known.
Okay, but it makes sense. You'll see why. See, it was conducted that digital technology, such as strategic video gaming, can stimulate activity because it encourages us to use System 2 over System 1 more often, making thinking and decision making more reliable. This is because it does not encourage people to stay fixated on a certain answer, you see?
Okay, I see your point, but I still love The Sims and no one can take that away from me.
I really think that I need to try this game. No joke. Should we move on to the next study?
Yeah, of course. So the next study this is a French name. I believe it's pronounced Bavalier and all. Whose aim was to investigate the connection between action games and decision making. The sample consisted of 2 groups of men and women whose mean age was around 26, and they said that they hadn't played video games in the past year. One group was asked to play 2 action video games for 2 hours for like a total of 50 hours. And the second group was asked to play a simulation game in which they had to make decisions about a character's life. And after 50 hours, they were asked to do a computer test. The screen test showed a pattern of dots, and participants had to determine which way a majority of the dots were moving. And this varied. So like some patterns were easy, some were more complex. And as you can assume, it was probably a challenge. The finding shows that although both groups were able to accomplish the task, those who had played the action video games did the task faster and with fewer errors. And therefore, it can be concluded that those who played action video games were able to decipher a large amount of information more quickly and come to a decision. The researchers argue that people's ability to decipher a large amount of information and come to a decision quickly is improved because of, the action video games.
Haha, I told you so. But it is still quite unbelievable. I would have never thought that the action games can help decision making. But now that I think about it, it kind of makes sense, especially with those stressful action video games. I can see how the activity could transfer into our decision making skills.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe I should switch from Sims and start action games.
Yeah, you could use some extra help, couldn't you?
Yeah.
Anyways, next study, which is Kun et al. The aim of the study was to study the effect of prolonged video games playing on the brains of young adults.
Okay, now I know this will be relevant to us.
So, researchers had participants play Super Mario 64 for 30 minutes every day for 2 months, using a pre and post test design. Researchers used MRI to scan the brains of participants before and after the 2-month period. They also used MRI scans of a control group who did not play video games. The researchers found that the volume of gray matter in the prefrontal cortex related to the strategic planning and decision-making, and the hippocampus related to the memory formation, and the cerebellum related to motor function had increased.
Wow.
This was larger compared to the control group.
We've looked at all these studies, and all I'm getting right now is that video games are they actually good for us?
Well, let's get into the analysis for these studies, and then we can decide.
Okay. So, methodology-wise, what I noted was that for Glass, Maddow, and Love, the strengths of the methodology were that it used the triangulation method, of course. And using several research methods in one study would help validate the study more, as it is explored through, varied lenses, tested through different methods,
Yeah, but the sample was a limitation since it was both small and only female. If the researchers were to include males and make the sample larger, the study would have been more generalizable. And as for Bavelier et al., one of the strengths of the methodology was using 2 different games, a simulation and an action game, and this study provided a comparison for findings, and meaning another study would not have been able to conduct, would not have to be conducted to compare.
But a weakness was the consistent and long hours of gaming, which may not align with reality. And this would mean low ecological validity. And with Kuhne and al., a major strength of the methodology was using the MRI scans, which were able to provide biological evidence.
For sure.
And really, biological evidence, it's everything. It provided more insight on where exactly improvements could be seen in the brain. But I think that a weakness was using a small sample group. And this could mean that the study could lack generalizability. Yeah.
I completely agree, though. I also think that there are more alternative explanations for the studies. If you see Glass and Maddow and Love, an alternative explanation to the findings could be that the participants were taking part in other activities, which could induce cognitive flexibility. And this is a possibility since the study does not really outline any restrictions of activities, meaning participants were most likely doing other activities as well as playing video games, And I feel as if this could also explain the findings of Bavelier et al., If participants were taking part in activities other than playing video games, which could improve their deciphering and decision-making skills, this could mean that action video games are not solely responsible for their change in cognition.
Yeah, I see your point. And after some consideration, I feel that Kuhn and All's experiment could also have like an alternative explanation. The age group of the sample. Like when you think about it, the sample consisted of only young adults who were in their development stage. And it's very possible that the findings could simply be like a stage of growth in the minds of the participants and not actually linked to playing video games.
Honestly, that's such a letdown because I really wanted video games to be the soul.
Yes.
But it does make sense. We do change a lot as adolescents, and so quickly too. I feel like gender considerations also need to be looked at in these studies. For Glass, Meadow, and Love 2013, using only females in their sample creates a lack of generalizability. And a study consisting of only female it has so much gender bias, and it's difficult to apply to males.
Yeah.
Therefore, including males in the study would have been more appropriate. And for Bevelier et al., gender was not a factor that was considered. Again, although this may not have provided large difference in the result, it is possible that many of the females might have not been taking the study seriously, considering large number of females tend not to play video games regularly. I know this might sound sexist and stereotypical, but it could make sense since societal norms have conditioned many women to find more feminine hobbies.
Yeah, but that does make it makes sense. I do agree with your point there. I feel like the same could be said with Kuhn et al. The study does not reveal the gender of the participants, and the results may have possibly been different if gender was taken into account, especially since the participants were young adults, you know? And as for the ethical considerations, it seems that all the studies seem to be following ethical standards, right?
That's a letdown.
Oh my God.
We wanted more Freudian psych studies.
Exactly, but come on, like this is pretty ethical. The only area of concern is like, for me, the extensive hours which the participants played video games in all the studies. This could cause, I'm assuming, physical health concerns and mental health concerns if the participants didn't maintain like normal social relations and had to be locked up in their homes playing the video games, you know?
Yeah. And as for cultural considerations, none of the studies outline a sample which consisted of a participant sample which was from different cultures. And this was not a great concern since many of the studies asked participants to start playing video games instead of using prior knowledge. The only cultural consideration which could affect these studies is the possible lack of knowledge on video games that a certain culture may have. However, this is pretty unlikely.
Yeah, agreed. So this is all we have for today. We hope we have left your minds running and creating your own conclusions. Let us know your opinions on this topic in the chat box below.
And make sure to include your other studies which could help us develop our claim if you're familiar with any.
Thank you all for listening to our podcast. We appreciate it so much, and we hope you will tune in next week for our next podcast. We hope you have a wonderful day.
Bye, Psych lovers. See you all next time. Remember to follow and listen to the Psych Crunch weekly. Goodbye.
Yeah. Bye, guys.